I'm Erin Roberts, and I'm a partner at Zzeem. And today we're talking about getting the best and the most from your board. If your board's operating like a well-oiled machine, your association can do everything better. You'll see the impact in your influence, your visibility, your membership, and your association performance. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Zzeem is a consulting and association management agency, and it's our pleasure to have you join us. For those of you who are regular attendees at our events, you know we deliver practical, valuable information in less than 45 minutes that you can use immediately. These events also help us to give us an opportunity to help you see some of the work that we do. So when you're looking for help, we hope you'll reach out to us. Today we're going to talk about some proven tips and tactics to leverage the ability, talent, and influence of your directors. So why does this matter? Remember, your directors are a significant resource. And if we do this well, we are going to have greater impact, we're going to have greater influence, we're going to have greater visibility, we're going to have a stronger board, and because we have a stronger board, we're going to have a stronger association. What we're going to talk about today is building the pipeline. We're going to show you how to make sure you've got a pipeline of really good directors for your board and also for your committees. We're going to talk about how you engage new directors when they come on board, how you motivate them, how you manage their performance, and finally, for the full life cycle, how and when to say goodbye. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this podcast is part of the High Performance Membership Organization series, otherwise known as the HPO Podcast. If you'd like to find out more about what an HPO is all about, just scan the QR code on the screen. If this link was forwarded to you, get your own personal subscription to our podcast and don't miss an episode. We also have a full slide deck for this episode. Just ask for a copy if you'd like one. So let's talk about what success looks like. If we're doing a really great job of this, we will have highly engaged directors, they will have very high productivity, and we will have a strong volunteer pipeline of people who want to get onto the board of directors and are going to be really good. So we mentioned earlier that directors are an absolutely massive resource. And those resources really encompass three areas: ability, energy, and influence. And if we do a really good job of using the ability, energy, and influence of our directors, it'll have a direct impact on the results for our particular association. So let's talk about these three things. Ability. What we mean by ability is that we're talking about the knowledge, the skills, and the natural talents that each of your directors has. Each director will have specialized knowledge and skills, and that's obvious what those things are. It'll be relative to your profession, to your industry, to your sector. They will also have natural talents. Maybe they're a great public speaker. Maybe they're a great host. Maybe they're great at making people feel comfortable and belonging. Maybe they're a great salesperson. Whatever their natural talents are, that's part of the ability that they're bringing to the organization. Let's talk about energy. Energy is super important. You can have all the ability in the world, but if you don't have any energy to do something for an organization, it's not going to help. When we're talking about energy, we're talking about what interests you as an individual, what really gets you excited. What are the topics that you really want to engage in that doesn't seem like work because it's so enjoyable? What are your passions? What are you passionate about? And related to passions are also hot buttons. You know, sometimes people are interested in becoming volunteers because there's something that drives them nuts about the organization and they want to fix it. So all of those things can be harnessed, and that energy can be used to really deliver value from each of your directors. Now, when it comes to committees, remember we've talked about ability so far, and we've talked about energy. When you're recruiting for committees, or for the board for that matter, committees especially, you need to include people who have abilities. You need to include people who have the kind of knowledge and talents that are going to be really helpful on that committee. But you also want to include people who are keen to learn, who have the energy. Maybe they don't have the knowledge yet. Maybe you don't know yet whether they have the natural talents, but they have the energy. So you want people who've got ability. You've got people who want energy. If they've got both, that's great, but you want both types of people on your committees. Now, finally, let's talk about influence. Influence means individuals who will be listened to by people that you need to listen to you. So that is members for sure, and other stakeholders, leaders in your sector, government. You want people on your board of directors who can influence each of these three areas. So, what do we need? In terms of leveraging the ability, energy, and influence of our directors, what do we need to have? First of all, we need to have a solid governance platform. That's the underpinning for everything. That's ground zero. Every organization needs that. And if we don't have that, we don't have the basics. Above and beyond that, we want a system to be able to leverage the ability, energy, and influence of our directors. So let's talk quickly about what the right platform is. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about all of these elements here. I'll tell you where we are going to go into detail, and we will be doing another podcast in this series talking more about the governance system. First of all, we do need a documented governance system. So whatever that is, if you use policy governance, great. That's well documented and you've got the information about how to run a policy governance kind of board. Anything else that you've got, you need the system to be documented. This is the way we operate. You also want to have strong working relationships, and that's between your directors because they need to work together, and also between directors and the CEO because that's a critical partnership. You also want to make sure that directors know their roles. Now, that's two things. It's fiduciary, and maybe they already know that. Maybe they need training. I think training is a good thing regardless. And also their personal roles. Why are they on the board? What is the ability, energy, and influence that made them a really good fit for the board? So their fiduciary responsibility, which is the same for every director, and their personal role, which will be different, moderately different for each director. The other elements of the platform are policies and processes to keep us on track. Now, for those of you who find policies and processes boring, I sympathize. I completely sympathize. And sometimes it can be a little tedious to work through it and get this done. But believe me, it's worth it. I can tell you countless examples of how it saved time, energy, argument by simply having a policy in place before it was needed. There's a strong ROI on having policies and processes. It really saves time and energy going forward. Now, in terms of the next elements of the right platform, these last three elements, 5, 6, and 7, are the ones we're going to focus on today. Making sure you've got the right people in these positions, making sure those people are motivated, informed, and effective, and finally, that you've got steady turnover. No matter how good a director is, and no matter how valuable they are, remember, the longer they stay, the more they're taking up a seat, which is stopping new thoughts and new experiences from coming onto the board. That doesn't mean they can't come back again, but you do want to make sure that you've got regular turnover of your board of directors. So, how do we leverage the ability, energy, and influence of our directors? What we're going to talk about today, as we said earlier, is making sure you've got a good pipeline. So we got lots of good people in that pipeline. We don't want to be scrambling at the last minute to fill a board vacancy. We want to make sure they come on and they're immediately engaged. They've got something to motivate them right away, that their performance is being managed in a way that works well for them and for the organization, and that there is a process to say goodbye. So let's talk about building the pipeline. We often talk about succession plans. And usually when we're talking about succession plans, I'm just thinking of this in order of priority about how boards think about it. They tend to think about it for the CEO and the president or the chair. Typically, we will have a succession plan in place for them. If we don't, most of us recognize that that's something a bridge that we do need to cross. But we also want to make sure that we've got a succession plan for chairs of all of our committees and potentially our task forces if they're still involved. So we want to have a succession plan for all of the leaders in our organization that is at least one deep. So there's a successor for every leader in the organization. You want to make sure that in that succession plan, you've identified people that have either ability, energy, or influence, or in the best of all possible worlds, all three. Now, I want to talk briefly here about complainers because complainers are really important. They're not just important because they complain, And that gives you information. That's value in any event. If somebody calls up and says, I really don't like this, or I don't like the way you're doing this, that's valuable information. And whatever they're saying, there are definitely other members who are thinking that, but they haven't bothered to pick up the phone or send you a message. The difference between somebody who thinks and somebody who complains is somebody who is engaged. They are trying to make it better. Now, if they've taken the trouble to complain, it means they've got a certain amount of energy and they've chosen to use that energy to help. So they've got energy already. They've also got influence, and you've got to keep in mind that this can be positive or negative influence. It's really up to you. If somebody complains and you immediately respond to them, you are looking for more information, looking for a way to try to make it better, looking for potential help from them, you are looking for the opportunity to make sure that their influence is used positively. If you ignore them, if you wait a long time to get back to them, if you come back with a poorly thought out answer, chances are that that complainer is going to be talking to other members and saying how they are not happy, and they're going to be explaining why it didn't work for them when they reached out to you. That's negative influence, and obviously you don't want it. But if you responded right away, you proposed a solution, you got them engaged, it gives them an opportunity to have positive influence. I was unhappy with such and such, but Joe picked up the phone right away, spoke to me, gave me an opportunity to get involved and to help make change. And that's how I ended up on the board. Something along those lines. Don't lose the opportunity to take advantage of what complainers are making obvious that you can gain from. Now, in terms of building the pipeline, we want to talk about the two things really. What is the role of the nominations committee, and how are you doing your outreach to build the pipeline? So let's talk first about the nominations committee. You want to make sure that your nominations committee has a terms of reference. That's also known as a mandate. It may be obvious what a nominations committee is supposed to do, but you want to spell it out. Keep in mind, the nominations committee isn't just there to fill a vacancy, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You want to make sure that the nominations committee has identified the abilities that we have on the board and the abilities that we don't. This is often referred to as a skills matrix. What kind of skills do we have on the board? But you want to include in that abilities and influence. So it's going to be abilities, energy, and influence. That's going to be what we have on our matrix. Now, we also want to make sure that we include suppliers in our nominations committee. Why and what are suppliers? First of all, suppliers are the people that sell stuff, provide stuff to your core members. So if your core members are dentists, the suppliers are going to be people that sell or market stuff to dentists. Why do you want to make sure you're including suppliers? A couple of reasons. But the main one is suppliers know everybody. That's their job. They're there to sell to the sector, the profession, the industry. They need to know everybody in there. And so they've got a really broad list of contacts. And that's something that's really valuable in the nominations committee, because they will know people, and they will have heard things about people, and that's really valuable in your nominations committee. So you want to make sure that you're including suppliers. Also keep in mind that suppliers, their employers typically value them having a volunteer role in an organization that has people that they want to include in the range of their sales and marketing activities. So usually they will get strong support from their employers, which means they may have more time to devote to that particular committee. Also keep in mind that I want to remind you about the nominations committee. The nominations committee isn't something that you strike just when you have a vacancy and, oh gosh, the AGM's coming up, we got to fill that vacancy. You want to make sure the nominations committee is working year round. And let's talk about what that looks like. In terms of our outreach and our call for nominations, we're really looking at two ways of building that pipeline. First of all, every time we have a vacancy, we want to do a broad call for nominations to all of our members. We want to make it clear that we have a vacancy and it's open. We want to hear from everybody who's interested. And then what you also want to do is explain the process. There's going to be all sorts of people who think, oh, geez, I might put up my hand for that, but I don't really know anybody on the board of directors. And, if you don't know somebody, you're probably not going to get, so I'm not even going to bother. Explain the process. Explain how it works. And this is how the process should work. You should have a nominations policy. And the process should work something along these lines. There's going to be a call for nominations every time we have a vacancy. We will ask people to complete a form or submit a bio or answer a couple of questions to nominate themselves. Then the nominations committee will look at literally each and every nomination, and then the nominations committee will interview them. And by the way, interview everybody that applies. Unless you've got dozens or hundreds, you probably can make time to interview everybody. That makes them feel that there is some reward for their application. Their application is being recognized. It gets you to learn more about people that you maybe haven't met, and it helps to build your pipeline. So you're going to get an interview, then the nominations committee will make a recommendation to the board, then the board will put together a proposed slate of directors for the members to vote on. So make sure they understand how the process works so they've got a level of comfort with it. Now, that's your broad call for nominations, and that's really important. You also want to make sure that your directors are all tasked with personal outreach. Now, the nominations committee is going to take the lead on this, but remember, they don't know everybody. Every director should be thinking about, do I know somebody within the membership that is not currently serving on a committee or on the board that I think could be a real asset to a committee or to the board? Make sure that they are picking up the phone, sending a message and saying, hey, by the way, Bob, I was thinking of you, and here's why. People are going to be much more inclined to say yes to a volunteer opportunity if you explain to them why they personally are a really good choice for that role. It may be something they haven't even thought about. A lot of us, when we have talents, we think, oh, yeah, that's nothing. Everyone can do that. And that tends to be the way humans think. If you can do something really well and really easily, you think everybody can. In reality, that's probably not true. So if you want Bob to be interested, do that personal outreach. Now let's talk about how that works. This whole idea of building the pipeline is a long-term perspective. So we're not just looking for people who are willing and able to serve right now. We're looking for people that are willing and able to serve now and in the future. So you want to be maintaining a prospect list of new prospects for committees and for the board. You want that documented. You want to be able to say, this is the last time we talked with this person. This is what they said. Did they say no? You still want them on the list. At least you know they've said no, and that might change next year or the year after. If they said yes, you definitely want to know that. And if they said yes, but not now, that's what you need to have on your list. Okay, I've got 2 kids that are under 2. I don't have time to do it right now, but I would love to be able to do it in a couple or in a few years. Make sure you've got a prospect list and you've got some notes. Keep in mind too, although we are building a pipeline for the board, we want to be recruiting into committees from that prospect list as well too. Now, if we can get to a point, where everyone on our board of directors has previously served on one of our committees, that is a huge learning curve and huge value in terms of their ability to be able to hit the ground running when they get onto the board. So remember that this prospect list is for committees as well as for the board. Now, let's talk about engaging new directors. We talked about building our pipeline. Now, let's say we've got a great pipeline, and now we've got a couple of new directors on the board. How do we make sure that they are immediately engaged and ready to contribute? First of all, we need to train them. People don't like to feel stupid. And when they feel they don't know something, they don't understand something, they're going to take a stand back and look first. Until they understand what they feel they need to understand, they may not be contributing. They may just be listening and trying to work it out. So take that off their plate. Train them immediately, not just in governance. And that's critical because you want to make sure everyone on the board has the same understanding of what is appropriate governance and what is best practices. Don't just go with what they might have learned elsewhere, which might not have been best practices. They also want to know how things work and who's who in the zoo. So explain to them how the hierarchy works, who does what, who makes what kinds of decisions, so that they feel really comfortable and confident to start contributing right away. And finally, if you are a membership organization, make sure every director is very clear on what your member value proposition is. This is the what's in it for me when somebody says, well, why should I bother becoming a member? And what you need for that is 2 things. You want to have a documented member value proposition that you've worked hard on and you're confident and it's published. Then what you want each director to do is to have them look at that and then create their own personal narrative. There's going to be things in that member value proposition that really resonate with them and other things that don't particularly resonate with them. So you want them to have a story in their head that they can tell whenever they're talking to a prospective member, that they can say, for me, this is why I joined the organization. And now that I've been a member for X number of years, this is why I stay with the organization. Sometimes and often, these are two different things. So they need to have their own personal narrative around your member value proposition. So training, governance, who's who in the zoo, how things work, and the member value proposition, my personal narrative. You also want to make sure you immediately connect them with other directors. You know, when you walk into a room, whether it's a Zoom room or whether it's in person, no matter how confident you are, there's always a level of insecurity. You know, I don't know any of these people, but they all know each other. And they all know more than me because they've had experience on this board. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable, they have a sense of belonging and a sense of confidence to ask questions that they might feel, you know, everyone else knows. The best way to connect them with other directors and indeed with other members is to get them on a committee right away. Every director should understand that once they're on the board of directors, they are expected to be part of a committee. And that's going to be true for the entire duration of their time on the board of directors. Also make sure that particularly in the first 6 months, to a year, that both the CEO and the chair are making regular efforts to reach out to the new directors. You know, how are things going? Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? Making sure that they recognize that not only are you going to be reaching out to them, but you're there for them if they ask questions. Maybe there's something they don't feel comfortable asking in front of everybody else. They can just pick up the phone or send a message to you. So we've talked about building the pipeline. We've talked about engaging new directors. Let's talk about motivating the directors. What human beings need to feel motivated is to be focused on something for which they have an interest, passion, and or ability, and that they have the opportunity to actually accomplish something. And in terms of accomplishments, we need to make sure that we are celebrating all accomplishments, short-term wins, long-term wins, easily won, hard fought. We need to make sure that we are using our challenges that come up, we're using our opportunities that come up, and we're celebrating our wins. So let's talk about using challenges and opportunities. First of all, this is something we should be doing anyways. But it's also something that keeps things interesting. We can ignore the challenges, we could ignore the opportunities, but that's not going to get us ahead. We need to have a way of identifying them and then of doing something about them. So let's talk about challenges. Whether it's a challenge or an opportunity, we want to make sure that once we've identified the challenge or the opportunity, that we've also identified the desired outcome. And that requires a board discussion. Here's this challenge that's just come across. You know, somebody in the industry has done something that's been, you know, very negatively portrayed in the media. It's making us all look bad. What is the desired outcome here? Well, the desire, it probably is that the challenge never happened in the first place, but it's there now. What is the desired outcome? How do we want to turn this into an opportunity or something that is neutral rather than negative? So the first and most important thing is to identify the desired outcome. Now that's true for opportunities as well too. We want to look at an opportunity and identify the desired outcome. What kind of things might be opportunities? A stakeholder is in trouble. Maybe we aren't in trouble, but a stakeholder is, and we're in a position to be able to help that stakeholder. Maybe there's specialized knowledge that is trending right now. All of a sudden, this type of specialized knowledge is trending because it's really important right now. And by the way, we have members with that specialized knowledge, or really any connection to any viral trend. What is something that we can jump on top of because we have natural knowledge and ability and experience in this area. So in all cases, whether it's an opportunity or a challenge, understand it for what it is, identify the desired outcome. So now we've identified the challenge or the opportunity, we've identified the desired outcome. Now what do we do next? We figure out a strategy. What is the strategy that is going to get us to that desired outcome? Make sure all of the directors have clear and short-term tasks. So there may be maybe long-term things that we need to deal with here, but make sure we've got short-term tasks here. What are our first few steps? Who's going to do them? And how are we going to do them? Make sure we've got the resources to accomplish that desired outcome. So whether it's money, whether it's volunteers, make sure that we know what we're doing, we know where we're going, and we have the resources to do it. Now we're going to start executing it. And as we go along each step of the execution, celebrate our wins. Great, we did this. Next, we did this. And make sure that, if you're the CEO or the chair, you might look at a win and go, oh, well, whatever. That was something we had to do anyways. Celebrate it. If you don't celebrate it, the people that were actively involved in accomplishing it aren't necessarily going to feel the joy of an accomplishment. So don't just brush things off as, yeah, that was something that we needed to do anyways, let's move on. And as humans, we tend to do that anyways. Celebrate wins and congratulate people on their role in getting that win. So, 4 things in terms of motivating the directors. Get the board invested in the desired outcome. What is the desired outcome? Make sure the board has identified it, they're invested in it. Make sure your directors see and feel the wins, the small ones and the large ones. Because every time we have a sense of accomplishment, we have a sense that we've contributed. That gives us confidence, it gives us empowerment, and it gives us energy to do more. Now, let's talk about managing performance. Performance is important for volunteers just as it is for employees. And what do we need to do in order to manage performance well, and what do we need to avoid? First of all, let's keep in mind that strong governance means 3 things when it comes to individuals. Clear roles, we know exactly what the roles are. Strong agenda management, so we have really effective, efficient meetings. And we are working in an environment of integrity, professionalism, and respect. These are the things that are relevant as it relates to individual directors. So let's talk about clear roles. First of all, every director needs to be able to distinguish between operations and governance. Governance is the work of the board. Operations is the work of the CEO and the staff. You want governance to be overseeing at a very high level the operational work, but not getting involved in the operational work. So if you want to make sure that your directors are productive, you want to get them focused on governance, not on operations. So it's really important that they understand that big picture distinction. You also want to make sure that they also understand the role of the officers and the role of the committee chairs. Now, keep in mind, it's not just important that officers and committee chairs understand their own roles, but that others understand their roles as well too. Because if nobody really understands what the treasurer is there to do, they're not really going to be understanding what the treasurer is accountable for, what they can expect from the treasurer. Everybody needs to know the role of the officers and the committee chairs. Clear roles. Secondly, strong agenda management. If you've got a poorly written agenda, it's going to be a lot more difficult to have effective and efficient meetings. Equally, even if you got the best agenda you could possibly have, if your chair, your committee chair, or your board chair isn't good at facilitation, they may be inclined to wander, to go down rabbit holes, and even the best agenda could get blown up within the first 5 minutes because the person that's facilitating doesn't have a natural ability to facilitate and hasn't had training in facilitation. So make sure whoever is going to chair, whether it be a committee or whether it's the board, that they've had facilitation training, that they understand how to be a good facilitator. Now let's go back to the agenda. Every time you have an agenda, you want to make sure of a few things. You want to make sure that for the board at least, that agenda is focused on strategy. Yes, there's going to be some operational stuff in there, but you want to make sure that every board agenda has more focus on strategy so that you're keeping your board thinking at this level, at a high level. You want to also make sure that every single agenda item on there is timed. So we're going to be working on this agenda item from 12 to 12:20 or from 12 to 12:05. That tells the people that are participating in the board meeting, this is the amount of time that is appropriate to spend on this. So they're not thinking that a 5-minute item, it's good to make it into a half-hour item. So timing is really important. The beginning and the end timing for each agenda item. You also want to make sure that the deliverable for that agenda item is stated clearly on the agenda. Is this something that we need a vote on? Is this something that we just need a decision on? Is this something that we just need to discuss for the future? Or is this something that is for information only? Make sure that the deliverable for each agenda is there. Now, I could do a whole podcast on agendas, so I won't, but just suffice it to say, the way your agenda is structured is really important. And you want to make sure you've got support materials. So every time they need to make a decision, they need to be informed, they need to have a vote. Make sure they've got the materials that they can read ahead of time before they get in there that's going to enable them to make an informed decision. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute. Now, operating in an environment of integrity, respect, and professionalism. Remember that old adage, common sense is not common. Certain people believe that certain behaviors are appropriate on a board of directors. Others may not feel the same way. So you need to define what appropriate behavior is on a board of directors. Also keep in mind, you might have a person that has strong ability for integrity, respect, and professionalism, but they've worked on boards in the past that really don't have those elements. So it's really important to make sure that you've given them training and make sure you give them case studies in what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. If we don't have examples, sometimes it's difficult to know. So make sure the training includes case studies. You also want to have policies around what is appropriate behavior. And that's not just appropriate behavior in board meetings. I've met many directors who are absolutely respectful and professional in the board meeting. They get outside of the board meeting, they get on their social platforms, and they turn into a completely different person. So we need to talk about our policies need to cover not just behavior in the boardroom, but behavior outside of the boardroom. What's expected of us? What are we supposed to do in a board meeting? What are we not supposed to do in a board meeting? Also keep in mind, as we're recruiting people, we want to be recruiting people who have the appropriate character to help provide that environment of integrity, respect, and professionalism. What is their character and what is their background experience? Have they been in a situation where that is part of what they do in their day-to-day job? That really helps because it will be ingrained in them. Now, let's talk about what to avoid. Really, there are 4 things we want to avoid here. One is groupthink. And that is something which is highly prevalent and just human nature. When we all come from a similar background, are we all from the same profession? Are we all from the same industry? Are we all from the same special interest group? It means we are going to be all inclined to think in a certain direction, which means we have the potential to miss the other side of the argument. So groupthink is something we want to avoid because that can lead to uninformed decisions and inadvertent results. We want to make sure that we've got parameters. We've got parameters that define how we behave, how we do things, and how we accomplish things. We want to make sure that we're avoiding, remember, those inadvertent results, which can come from a lack of information, could come from groupthink, it could come from other things. We also want to make sure we're avoiding the CEO and the board, any discord between the CEO and the board. So let's talk about groupthink. How do we avoid that? Well, one obvious thing to do is to make sure that for each board meeting, you assign somebody to be the devil's advocate. So if on this board meeting we are all dentists, you want to make sure that one of us dentists is going to be the devil's advocate. And what we're talking about here is, let's say we're trying to make a decision, and everybody says, "Well, of course the answer is yes. Like, is there any dissent? Of course there isn't. We all agree it should be yes." That is the cue for the devil's advocate to spring into action. Now, the devil's advocate probably thinks the answer is yes, too. What their job is to say, okay, if I had to make an argument for the no side, what would be in that argument? They are going to be thinking on the spot and thinking about what the no side would say, and then say, okay, here's what I can see for the other side of the equation. Now we can honestly say we looked at both sides before we made a decision. And it might be that the devil's advocate is actually going to come up with something that nobody ever thought of before. The other way of handling it is to have outsiders on your board of directors. So if you are an association of dentists, and again, I don't want to pick on dentists here, if you're an association of dentists, it might be helpful if the board isn't entirely made up of dentists. Maybe we want somebody on the board that has a background in finance, has a background in marketing, has a background in advocacy, but they don't have a background in dentistry. They're going to bring a whole different perspective to the board of directors, and that's really helpful as well too. I don't see this all that often in associations. Generally speaking, we look from within our membership to get on the board of directors, which makes perfect sense. But we don't tend to recruit from outside, and we don't tend to appoint devil's advocates. So I guarantee if you do one or both of these things, it's definitely going to help you avoid groupthink and help you to see the broader picture. Now, in terms of parameters, what do we mean when we say we need parameters. These are guardrails around the board's work. So of course we need bylaws. And by the way, bylaws aren't just something that we have because it's a legal requirement. Bylaws should be something that we are reviewing every year so that we can make sure that our bylaws are still applicable to how we do business and how we want to do business. Now, bylaws have to be passed by the members, so that's something you can only do at a special members meeting. So it's probably something that you'd only want to be reviewing once a year. Policies are things that are determined by the board, and the board can add a policy, they can remove a policy, they can change a policy on their own. They don't need to take that back to the members. So it's very easy to create new policies, modify policies, do whatever you want. What you need to decide is what are the policies that we actually need. And again, that's kind of a podcast in its own right. But what you want to do with policies, don't have too many, have just enough. Have just enough to deal with the situations that you think could possibly happen. Conflict of interest is an obvious one. People on a board of directors, there will be conflicts of interest, so make darn sure that you have a policy around that. Figure out which policies you need. Make sure that you have a situation where the policies are vigorously discussed by the board. You don't want to assign somebody, or worse still, just go to a lawyer and say, give us a policy for conflict of interest. Come back to the board. Okay, is that good? Yeah, we stamp it. We're good to go. The board needs to go through each element of the policy and think, is this going to work for us? And if you're going to use third parties, which are a great idea because they understand about crafting policies, make sure that you're working directly with them and helping them to understand this is stuff that we need to address in the policy. Because often third-party service providers will give you boilerplate. And I'm not knocking lawyers here, they're just trying to keep costs down. But often that will be the case. If you go to legal counsel, you're going to get boilerplate bylaws, you're going to get boilerplate policies. So if you want them to work for you, you're going to have to work with that service provider and be prepared to pay for it to make sure that your policies are customized to do what you need to do. Now, let's talk about avoiding uninformed decisions and inadvertent results. First of all, remember we talked earlier about we want to make sure that we don't have groupthink. Groupthink can result in inadvertent results. Wow, I never thought of that. Well, if you'd had a devil's advocate, you would have thought of that because the devil's advocate would have made sure that you do that. Make sure you're giving people really good training about what they need to do when a decision is required from them. Not just the first thing that comes to the top of first thing that is top of mind. You want to make sure that every time directors have to make a decision, that they've got the right support materials going with that agenda item to make that decision, and that they understand through training that they're expected to read those materials. I find it also helps on the agenda if you put an asterisk beside agenda items where there are support materials in the board package. It means that if that agenda item catches somebody's eye, in particular, they may drill down more on the support materials for that particular agenda item. So make sure you've got the right support materials. Make sure you've also got policies around how you do things, how you come to decisions, how you vote, those kinds of things. You want to make sure that you've got that. And make sure that you've got reminders at the board meeting itself. Remember, this is an item that we've got to vote on, so I hope everybody has read the materials. If you haven't read the materials, then please don't vote, because that would mean that you are making an uninformed decision. Also make sure, if you are an industry or trade association, that you have an anti-competition reminder at each board meeting, at each AGM, at each committee meeting, so people are reminded of what it is inappropriate to talk about or the ways in which it is inappropriate to talk. How to avoid CEO board discord. This could happen, and sometimes it happens despite all of our best efforts, but there are things that we can do to help stop this from happening. One thing that I find is really helpful is if the CEO and the chair/president have a weekly call. This does not have to be something where there's an agenda and it's going to take half an hour. Let's face it, nobody's going to do that. That's too much of a commitment. But a weekly call that is really just a touch point, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most, if you've got something that you've really got to discuss. But if you're the CEO, take responsibility for what's going to be on that weekly call. Make sure you tell them, this is what I want to share with you. Do you have anything that you want to share with me? So that never is a week going by where something could build up and start to get a head of steam on it, and you haven't had a chance to talk to the chair. And you don't want to have a situation where the CEO and the chair are only talking when there's a problem. You want to make sure that they have that dialogue. It helps them to get to know each other, it builds trust, and it helps them to work better together. Now, the other second point is open communication. I know that's obvious. Everybody says it. It's clear, but what does that really mean? One of the things it does mean is when there is a sense of unease, maybe people put up their hands and they said, yeah, I agree with that, but you can see that there's a look of puzzlement on their face. Maybe they agree, but they're not really sure whether they agree. Don't just gloss over it and try to plow through with the goal of getting agreement and getting the vote and getting it out of the way. That's what we do when we have a lack of maturity with respect to governance. There's just an inclination, well, let's just get the vote done and we'll be done with it. You know what? It's just going to come back to haunt you later. It might come back a week later, a month later, a year later, but believe me, it's going to come back. And if you don't deal with it now, it's going to build up a head of steam. So anytime you sense some just even unease, say, you know what, Alice, I feel like you might be a little uncomfortable with this. Can we do a better job of, discussing it? Do we need you to play devil's advocate role? Is there more information that you need? Address it right away. And if it's appropriate to have a one-on-one conversation with that person afterwards, make sure you make time for that as well too. In cameras. Okay, experts disagree on in cameras, and they disagree on should we have in cameras. If we do have in cameras, should the CEO be in the in camera or should they not be in the in camera? Should it be just staff that are excluded from the in camera? So let me give you my opinion on in cameras. First of all, I think there should be an in camera at every single board meeting. The reason for that is, and that it should not involve the CEO, but it should be the chair's responsibility to discuss what happened at the in camera with the CEO, not for attribution, not to say this person said this and this person said that, just to let them know and to let them know what's expected of them as a CEO to deal with that situation or to deal with that issue or to take something forward. Basically, every board meeting in camera is an opportunity for directors to ask questions or make a statement that they just don't feel comfortable making in front of the CEO. Believe me, they're going to make those statements anyways. If they don't have an opportunity to do it in an in-camera and they don't feel comfortable doing it in the board meeting, they're going to be stating it to other members or in side conversations, director to director. And that is far worse than giving them an opportunity at every board meeting to air concerns. Sometimes they just feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're going to hurt the CEO's feelings or make an enemy of the CEO. Give people an opportunity to air their concerns and make sure they understand what the in-camera is for. It's not to continue the board discussion that you were already having, but without the CEO there, is to discuss something that specifically you don't feel comfortable discussing in front of the CEO. And by the way, make sure that you help them to understand what is appropriate there. Discussing something that you don't feel is appropriate in front of the CEO would certainly be compensation, performance, those kind of things. But agenda items, remember the CEO and the board are a partnership. So that's my plug for in cameras. I think you should have an in camera session at every board meeting. And if you've got nothing to discuss, that's fine. So it was a 30-second in camera, off you go. Just make sure that the CEO and the chair are discussing afterwards, preferably immediately afterwards, was there any takeaways for the CEO out of that in camera? Now let's talk about saying goodbye. Now when we say goodbye, we're not necessarily saying goodbye forever. We're talking about something in the bylaws that gives people a term limit with off time. So for example, let's say that the board of directors term is 3 years. Maybe in your bylaws you say, okay, the maximum number of terms is 2 consecutive terms for a total of 6 years. At the end of that time, you need to step down from the board and you need to be away from the board for at least a year. That gives an opportunity for new directors to come onto the board, and it also gives the opportunity for somebody who really enjoys that work and was a valuable player to take a year off and come back again. Now, in terms of your term limits and your off time, typically that is going to be in your bylaws. You could have it in a policy. The only challenge with having it in a policy, it kind of lends itself to making changes based on personality. You know what? You know, Naomi is just a really great director. Wouldn't it be nice if she could stay on for another term? She could be doing all of this. Anything that the board can change kind of relatively quickly may work against you. So I encourage you to have that structure in your bylaws, and typically it is. Let's not also forget involuntary exits. Sometimes we've got a situation where a director just has to be encouraged to leave. It might be that they have ability, they have energy, they have influence, but they're just not showing up at board meetings, or they're not being willing to work on committees. They're just not there. In that case, we need to have a talk with them. And if they don't have time to devote to it, we need to encourage them to leave. So what we need to do is we need to plan for those involuntary exits. We need to have policies that say when somebody needs to make an involuntary exit, and we need to have a process around that. So you might have a policy that says, and this is very typical, anybody who misses 3 consecutive board meetings, or depending on how often you have board meetings, if it's only quarterly, it might be one board meeting. And you need to have things in there, health reasons, family emergencies, these kinds of things, but you want to have policies so that when you have to have that difficult conversation with a board member, you can say, look, I'm referring to this policy, and unfortunately it's relating to you right now. I'm wondering whether you've got the time to deal with this. And then you need to have a process. So the process could be, well, the first step is you're going to identify there is a non-compliance with policy here. Who's the person that's going to talk to this individual? Because it should be a one-on-one. You don't want to confront them in the middle of a board meeting. Ideally, it should be the chair. You don't want the CEO to have to do it, because CEO reports to the board of directors. You don't want them to have them dealing with individual problems on the board of directors. Just make sure that you've got a process so that whoever has to do it can follow that immediately, and they know what they're supposed to do. So let's quickly recap what we've talked about so far. What do we need? We need a solid governance platform, and we need a system to leverage the ability, energy, and influence of our members, of our directors. What does that involve? Building the pipeline, engaging our new directors immediately, motivating them right away, managing their performance, and knowing when and how to say goodbye. So here's 12 points to remember. Number 1, always be recruiting. This is a full-time job, not just when you have a vacancy. Recruit for your committees and for the board. Make sure you're using your suppliers effectively, because they know everybody. Train and engage directors immediately. Ensure their roles and their deliverables are clear. Make sure you understand each director's ability, energy, and influence. Understand them as an individual, and make sure you assign tasks to them that are meaningful for their ability, energy, and influence. Make sure you're using your agendas and your briefing materials effectively. Make sure you're using policies and training to manage performance. Avoid groupthink. Avoid uninformed decisions. Keep that trust and communication strong between the CEO and the board. And finally, number 12, ensure regular turnover of your board so you get fresh thoughts and fresh thinking on the board. So in terms of your next steps, I encourage you to pick one thing, get started on it right away, and if you have to postpone something to get started on one of these elements, figure out what you can postpone to make some progress in this area. Just before we go to live Q&A, if you want some help, maybe it's for governance training for your board. Maybe you're trying to solve a problem that's happening on your board right now. Maybe you need help with strategic planning. Just reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. So let's go to live Q&A. Kevin, what questions have we got?
So the first question is, do you have any insights on what the best practices are for managing and tracking strategic planning updates, or for supporting the board in maintaining that focus on the big picture strategic priorities?
Excellent question. First of all, you want to make sure that you've assigned accountability. So when you get a brand new strategic plan, you want to assign accountability oversight to an individual director or to a committee. You might have a strategic planning committee, you might have a governance committee, but you want to make sure that you've got somebody or a group of people focused on making sure that we're moving forward in our strategic plan, and we are discussing our progress on it on a regular basis. So start with accountability, an individual or a committee. Now, you also want to make sure that you're scheduling regular progress updates. If you have board meetings every month, you might want to have a update on your strategic plan every single month. Personally, I like doing it that way. It doesn't take a lot of time to do an update, and it does give you kind of immediate feedback where you might be slipping on something. You might be slipping on a date. If you're doing that on a monthly basis, that's really helpful. Now, if you only have your board meetings quarterly, then you want to make sure that you are doing progress updates at least at every board meeting. So you want to make sure quarterly updates are happening at a minimum. You also want to make sure that at least, I would say, at least once a year, and probably once a year is perfect if you've got those quarterly updates, that you've got a more fulsome review of the strategic plan. Where are we right now? Are we up to date on everything? Is there any nuance we have to add here? Is there any other task we need to add here? And by the way, your strategic plan should include milestones and dates and accountability in it, so you've got something to follow. Then make sure that you've got your full annual reviews where you take, an hour and a half to actually go through the whole strategic plan to see where we are.
All right, thanks, Aaron. The next question is, would you recommend any resources on the roles and responsibilities of a nonprofit board?
Yes, and forgive me for suggesting this, but I honestly think this is something that is really helpful. Go to our YouTube channel, and we've got all of our webinars and podcasts from the last recent couple of years on there. And we've got some really good resources on our governance playlist that will help you answer those kind of questions. It's free. You don't have to sign up or do anything. You just have to go there and watch them. And they are topic specific. So you can pick something that's specific for what you need right now.
Thanks, Aaron. And for everyone's convenience, I've dropped a link to the governance playlist on our YouTube channel in the webinar chat.
Thanks very
Our
much.
You're welcome. Our next question is, how do you implement governance changes to a board that has in the past maybe struggled a bit in the area of governance?
I think what I've learned is, first of all, you want to identify the problem that you want to fix. I have often spoken with a CEO and they've said, "Oh, our directors really need governance training," and they're probably right. They've probably skipped directly to the solution. But what's really important is if that's all you say and you hire a third party to come in and give you governance training, it doesn't mean that that governance training is going to be focused on the problem that you're trying to fix. So, first of all, figure out what is the problem that you want to deal with. Second thing is, again, you can bring somebody in, you can put something on an agenda, but you need to have your directors on side that it is a priority to make these changes. So if your board of directors doesn't see it as a priority, they're not going to be listening. They're not going to have their listening ears on. So the first two things, identify the problem you want to fix, and then make sure that you've got the majority of your directors on side where they feel it is a priority to make those changes. Then, and only then, if you can afford it, bring in a governance expert and ensure that they're going to provide something that's specifically customized for the needs and the concerns that you need at this very moment in time. It's not just generic governance training, but it's focused on the things that you need to solve right now. Um, and it could be, maybe it is governance training, or maybe it's a facilitated discussion. Maybe the board needs to have a facilitated discussion that is a governance topic, but they need some help in steering them to come to a conclusion. It could be one or the other of those things. If you can't afford to bring somebody from outside, then see what you can do about having somebody who knows something about governance give you the training or give you the facilitation. It's difficult sometimes because you want all of your directors to participate, and if one of them is going to be the facilitator really can't participate in the discussion. So those are just things to think about.
All right, so our next and looks like our last question is, how can a nonprofit board best utilize the collective experience and expertise of its directors?
Okay, collective experience and expertise of its directors. Well, I would maybe divide that into two parts and say, well, of its directors, I would definitely follow the 12 points that we ended this podcast with. That's really going to help you to leverage the ability, the energy, and the influence of your board of directors. Now, you probably also want to utilize the collective experience and expertise of your members as well too. And one great way of doing that is by bringing in more volunteers. If you can get your committee is really well populated, your task force is really well populated. A lot of people are going to be willing to be on a task force or a committee, and they may not be interested in being on the board. So therefore, you're not going to get their ability, energy, and influence on the board of directors. Let's get it on the committees. And make sure that we're taking advantage of it there. And also, even people who aren't willing to join committees, if you have online forums where there's an opportunity to people to go in and say, hey, I'm looking for this, that, or the other thing, and other people who will participate and say, hey, I know where you can get that, that's helpful as well too, and that's utilizing your members' collective experience and expertise. Do we have any more questions, Kevin?
Oh, that was the last question.
All right. Well, I'm hoping that you are going to join us at our next event. Our next podcast is on December 17th, and we're going to be talking about member renewals, locking in loyalty, 7 proven tactics to boost member renewals. Remember, this isn't magic, it is a process, and we'll give you some suggestions that we guarantee is going to help with either higher member renewals, bringing them in faster, or both. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. See you next month.